All right, so are you ready to dive into a case that's going to leave you scratching your head?
I'm always up for a good mystery. What do we got today?
Well, today we're tackling the story of Clarence Roberts.
Clarence Roberts.
Yeah.
The name rings a bell, but
Yeah, it's a story that sounds like it's straight out of a movie, to be honest. We're working with a true crime podcast episode on this one, and a few newspaper articles, too. And the details, well, let's just say they're all over the place.
sounds intriguing. Lay it on me.
Okay, so picture this. 1970, Nashville, Indiana. A fire rips through the Roberts garage.
Okay, tragic, but it happens.
Yeah, but here's the thing. They find a body in the wreckage, and everyone just assumes it's Clarence. But hold on, because things aren't adding up.
How so? What makes it so strange?
Oh, there are a bunch of weird details. For starters, there was a shotgun just lying across the body.
That's unusual.
Right, and then there's this blood type mismatch. The body had AB blood, but get this, Clarence's military records show B.
Wait, so the blood type doesn't match? That's a pretty big discrepancy.
Exactly, and those are just the initial red flags. The deeper you dig, the stranger it gets.
So it's not just a simple fire then. We're talking potential foul play.
Oh, yeah. And to make things even more complicated, Clarence's wife, Geneva, insisted the body was him.
Even with the mismatched blood type.
Yep. Even though investigators were already pretty suspicious about the whole thing, especially because the family was having some serious money problems, like deep in debt kind of problems.
So a possible motive starts to emerge. Was there a life insurance policy involved by any chance?
Oh, you bet there was. And not just one. Clarence had multiple policies totaling, get this, $850,000.
Whoa, $850,000. Back in 1970, that's an enormous sum.
You got it. That kind of money could solve a whole lot of financial troubles, wouldn't it?
For sure. I could see why the insurance company was hesitant to pay out without absolute proof of death.
Yeah, no kidding. And here's where things get really interesting. Just a few days before the fire, someone saw Clarence with this older man who suddenly collapsed in a liquor store.
Okay, so a random encounter. What's so strange about that?
Well, Clarence, who apparently didn't even know this guy, offered to take him to the hospital. And then, boom, both of them vanished.
Vanished. Like, without a trace.
Poof, gone.
This mystery man throws a whole new wrench into the mix. Could he be the one who died in the fire?
It's definitely a possibility. But if so, why hasn't anyone come forward to identify him?
Right, you'd think someone would be looking for him. Family, friends, somebody.
Exactly. This whole side story just adds more questions than answers.
It really makes you wonder about all the connections we might be missing. Almost like we're only seeing a small piece of a much bigger picture.
You know, you're right, and hold on tight because it gets even wilder. The day after the fire, a woman is assaulted in the high school parking lot.
Okay, but what does that have to do with the fire?
Well, according to her, the attacker had this really strong smell of fuel on him, like the accelerant used in the garage fire.
Whoa. That's a pretty specific detail and a rather disturbing coincidence.
I know, right? It makes you wonder if there's a link we're not seeing.
Even if it turns out to be unrelated, the timing and that detail about the accelerant are too key to just brush aside.
Totally agree. So with all this uncertainty swirling around, authorities decide to exhume the body, hoping a second look will clear things up.
Makes sense. Maybe a more thorough examination would reveal something they missed the first time.
You'd think, right?
Mm-hmm.
But instead of answers, things just got even more confusing.
Oh no, what happened?
Well, they find a tooth at the scene of the fire, and it matches one that Clarence had extracted years before.
Wait, so the tooth wasn't even in his mouth at the time of the fire?
Nope. Looks like someone planted it there.
So we're talking deliberate tampering with evidence.
Definitely looks that way. And on top of that, the experts start arguing about the blood type and X-ray evidence.
What do you mean they couldn't agree if it matched Clarence or not?
Exactly. How can experts change their minds based on the same information?
Makes you think, right? Like, how much can we really rely on what we think is solid evidence?
Right. And just when you think it can't get any crazier, guess what happens?
What? Don't tell me Clarence turns up alive.
Well, not exactly. But he does pop up as a suspect in a bank robbery in Indianapolis.
Hold on, a bank robbery. What's going on here?
And get this, the surveillance photos look a lot like him, leading investigators to believe he might actually be alive and well.
You're kidding. So now we're dealing with a possible fugitive on top of everything else. This is insane.
You know, right? It's like this case takes a sharp turn into a whole other genre every few minutes.
So if it is him, what's his motive for the robbery? Was he desperate because the insurance money wasn't coming through?
Maybe. Or maybe he needed cash to start a new life on the run.
Either way, this robbery adds a whole new layer of complexity to an already bizarre situation.
And guess what? It doesn't stop there. Fast forward 10 years and bam, another fire. This time at Geneva's house.
No way. Another fire. Are you
Or-
serious?
Yep, and you won't believe this. They find two bodies.
Two bodies, are they? Is one of them.
One is presumed to be Geneva, and they think the other might be Clarence. But, you guessed it, there's a problem.
Let me guess, more inconsistencies.
You got it. The parallels between the two fires are uncanny. Both involved carbon monoxide poisoning. Both victims had high blood alcohol levels. Both fires started near the bed, and they found accelerant at both scenes.
It's almost like someone was deliberately trying to recreate the first fire.
And to top it all off, there's no information available about the second man's blood type, just like with that first fire.
So we're back to square one with a mysterious, unidentified body and more questions than answers.
Pretty much. Even the grand jury couldn't figure it all out. They ruled Geneva's death a murder, but couldn't say for sure whether Clarence died in that second fire or if it was an accident.
And what about the first fire victim? Did they ever figure out who he was?
Nope. Still a complete mystery.
Man, this case is like a puzzle box with a secret compartment that just keeps leading to more compartments.
It is, isn't it? We're only just getting started.
It's frustrating, right? All these years later, and still so many unanswered questions.
It is, you know. It makes you think about how different things might have been if investigators had the tools and technology we have today.
Oh, absolutely. Back then, it was like working with one hand tied behind your back. So much crucial evidence could have been missed or misinterpreted.
Right. And just think about the families involved. The Roberts family and the mystery man's loved ones. They're still waiting for answers after all this time. Someone out there lost someone they cared about, and they deserve to know what really happened.
It's a tragedy. And it highlights how much these cases impact real people, you know? It's not just some abstract mystery.
Definitely. And it makes you wonder about the impact on the town itself. This happened in Nashville, Indiana. It's not a huge place. A case like this must have really shaken things up.
Oh, for sure. Secrets and unanswered questions have a way of casting a long shadow, even in a small town. Let's go back to those fires for a minute. What do you make of the fact that both involved accelerants and the high blood alcohol levels in both victims?
I mean, it's hard to ignore the possibility of foul play, right? Especially in that second fire. It seems pretty deliberate.
The way that accelerant was used in that second fire is particularly interesting. It was spread throughout the house, almost like someone was creating a trail, leading from Geneva's bed to the room where they found the other body. It wasn't just random.
You're right. And don't forget, they found gas cans at the scene. Someone wanted to make sure that fire burned hot and fast.
Yeah, it definitely points to premeditation. But the question is, what was the motive? Was it revenge? An attempt to cover up something else? Or was there someone else involved? Someone we haven't even considered?
Well, we did talk about the possibility of someone else being involved earlier. Remember those reports of someone lurking around Geneva's house before the second fire?
Right. Those reports add a whole other layer to this, don't they? Could it have been Clarence, maybe keeping tabs on his estranged wife? Or was it someone else entirely, with their own reasons for being there?
And we still don't know who that first fire victim was. That just leaves the door wide open for all sorts of speculation.
It's like every time we think we're getting close to an answer, another question pops up.
Exactly. But let's play a little game of what if. What if we could go back in time with all the forensic tools we have now? What do you think we could uncover?
Oh, man. The possibilities are endless. With DNA testing, we can finally get a definite answer on the identities of both fire victims. Maybe even use facial recognition software to try and identify the mystery man.
And we could run his information through missing persons databases? It's crazy to think what investigators back then had to work with compared to what we have now.
No kidding. Imagine if we could re-examine those x-rays with today's technology. The experts back then couldn't agree if they matched Clarence, but maybe with modern imaging techniques we could get a clearer answer.
And don't forget about genetic genealogy. Even a tiny DNA sample could potentially lead us to living relatives of the unidentified victim. We might finally be able to put a name to that face after all these years.
It's amazing how a single drop of blood or a strand of hair could unlock a mystery that's been cold for decades.
Makes you wonder if there's something somewhere that we've overlooked. Maybe tucked away in an evidence locker, just waiting to be re-examined with fresh eyes and new techniques. A fingerprint, a fiber, anything.
It's not just about the technology, though. It's about that relentless curiosity, you know? Approaching old evidence with a fresh perspective questioning the assumptions that were made back then. This case, with all its twists and turns, shows us how important that is.
For sure. And what about the whole insurance angle? Geneva was adamant that she deserved that money, even going so far as to accuse the investigators of hiding evidence. Was she just desperate? Or did she really believe that the mystery man was Clarence?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? We may never know for sure what was going through her mind. Maybe it was just about the money. But it's also possible she was caught up in her own web of lies, hoping against hope that her husband was still out there somewhere.
It's a good reminder that in these cases, there's always a human element. We're not just dealing with facts and evidence, we're dealing with real people, with emotions, motivations, and sometimes with their own versions of the truth.
Absolutely. It's easy to get caught up in the puzzle of it all, but we can't forget about the human cost. These events had a ripple effect, impacting families, the community, and even the investigators themselves.
This whole case is like a giant commentary on how easily facts can be twisted, how interpretations can shift depending on who's looking at the evidence. It makes you question everything you think you know.
And it makes you wonder about our own biases too, right? How they might shape the way we see things.
It's like that saying, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, or something like that. It's easy to focus on the stuff that supports what you already believe and ignore the stuff that doesn't.
Exactly. And this case, with all its conflicting information, it really makes us think about how we think. You know what I mean? We got to be willing to question our own assumptions, to be open to different explanations, even if they seem out there.
Yeah, for sure. And it makes you think about all the what ifs. Like, what if that neighbor hadn't seen the first fire when they did? What if someone at that liquor store had recognized that older man? Would things have turned out differently?
It's fascinating to think about, isn't it? How these small moments can have such a huge impact. It's like chaos theory in action, you know?
Yeah.
One tiny change in the whole course of events could be totally different. It really highlights how much we rely on chance and on people's observations, which aren't always reliable.
Right. It's a little unsettling to think about how much can depend on just random chance. It makes you realize how fragile our understanding of what happened can be.
And it highlights the human element in all this, too. Detectives, witnesses, even forensic experts. We're all capable of making mistakes, misinterpreting things, letting our own experiences and biases influence us.
Speaking of witnesses, remember those people who claimed they saw Clarence after the first fire? Some even said they saw him with another woman. If those sightings were legit, well, that would add a whole other layer to this story, wouldn't it?
It would. But memory is a tricky thing. How accurate were those sightings, really? Were people seeing what they wanted to see, or was Clarence deliberately trying to make people think he was still alive? It's hard to say for sure after all this time.
If he was out there living a secret life, I mean, that's like something out of a spy movie.
It's a tempting story to tell, isn't it? The master manipulator vanishing into thin air. But then you have that second fire, the one that took Geneva's life. And that feels a lot less like an escape and a lot more like a tragic ending to a very messy story.
Maybe that first fire didn't go as smoothly as Clarence planned. Maybe it set off a chain of events that he couldn't control, leading to that final fire. I mean, it's just a thought, but it's kind of chilling, isn't it?
Definitely. It shows how even the most well-thought-out plans can go wrong. It reminds us that we're not always in control of the outcomes, no matter how hard we try to manipulate things. So we've covered a lot of ground here. Where do we even begin to make sense of all this? What's the takeaway from a case as complicated as this?
Good question.
I think the biggest takeaway is that we need to be critical thinkers. Don't settle for easy answers. Question everything. Be skeptical. And accept that sometimes things are going to be ambiguous. We may never have all the pieces. But even without a neat and tidy resolution, the act of exploring this case, trying to put the pieces together, challenging our own perceptions, well, that has value in itself.
It really is like a giant jigsaw puzzle, isn't it? With missing pieces and some that don't quite fit.
Exactly. We can try to assemble it, but the full picture might always be just out of reach.
Well said.
But even without a definitive solution, this process of digging deeper, thinking critically, considering different viewpoints, it makes us better at processing information, and maybe even more aware of all the little mysteries that are hidden in plain sight all around us.
That's a great point. And who knows, maybe someday, with new technology or maybe just a fresh perspective, someone will find that missing piece and solve the puzzle. But until then, the story of Clarence Roberts is going to stay with us. A reminder that some secrets are meant to stay buried.
Well said. It reminds us to stay curious, keep asking questions, never stop searching for the truth, even when it seems impossible to find.
That's it for our deep dive into the Clarence Roberts case. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did, even though it left us with more questions than answers.
Thanks for joining us. And until next time, stay curious, keep those brains working, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.